Hello, everyone, and welcome back to NetApp On Air. As always, I am your host, Nick Howell. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have been off for the last month after an amazing Insight in Las Vegas. Very excited to be back doing the show, and there was some feedback that I heard at Insight this year, and we had a lot of new customers come up to me specifically and say, you know, Nick, we love the show, we love all the things that you're doing, but we can't find content on like how to get started. What are all these flex and snap words? How do we make the best use of them and all that? And I went, you know what? You're right. You're right. So I figured we would do a series for the remainder of the year, going over a myriad of all of the flex and snap words, starting with the most important one today, as you probably see in the title. We're going to be talking about SnapMirror. That's going to be the big one for today, as well as some of the other associated pieces of technology and how it all intertwines and how you put it all together. So grab a drink, sit back, relax. This is going to be a fun one. For those of you that are new to ONTAP, this is going to be foundational for you for everything that you do going forward. And for those of you that are seasoned, little gray-bearded ONTAP administrators, yeah, you're going to enjoy this one too. And maybe it'll refresh your memory on some of the technologies, and maybe you learn something about some of the history of it. So make sure you get in, sign up, follow us here on, or subscribe to us here on YouTube. Come join us in the Discord community is the best place to be. Our guest today hangs out in there. Drew and I are always in there. We've got tons and tons of experts, and we crossed the 5,000 member mark a month ago at Insight. So there are tons and tons and tons of people in there that can help you solve problems, whether it's anything from automation to virtualization and anything in between. We've got you covered in there. Our engineers hang out in there. All of our partners hang out in there. Come find us. It is a very technical community. We're not going to spam you with a bunch of stuff, I promise. So you definitely want to be in there for that. And you get to keep up with all of the on-air episodes right there. Let's go ahead and get to our guest today because we have a lot of ground to cover. We got history to talk about. We got future stuff we got to talk about. Well, we're not going to give away any future stuff, but you know what I mean. Like, we got to get into all of this stuff. So my guest today is Mr. Tony Ansley. Tony, how you doing, man?
Hey, Nick. How are you?
I'm good. Tony, you're a senior TME here covering. Well, why don't you introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I'm a senior technical marketing engineer at NetApp. I've been with the company for not quite 3 years. And I focus on, as it says underneath the moniker there, data services, specifically data protection services. And so I own a lot of the collateral and some of the content you see online and for SnapMirror and the technologies that are built upon the same technologies that SnapMirror uses.
Nice. So if you don't mind giving me a bit of a backstory, you said something before we got on the show, and I honestly don't think I've ever talked to someone in person that actually worked there, and you said the C word. You said Compaq.
Compaq, yeah. Spent 10 years at Compaq.
I have vivid memories of those white pizza boxes in the racks in the late 90s. And a lot of the work that I did at the time was contract work, moving people off of those things in the post-HP acquisition world. And you and I also worked on a lot of similar stuff around storage, a lot of Symmetrics, a lot of Clarion, a lot of evil words we're not supposed to say on a NetApp podcast, but but at the same time, like, those were sort of big technologies at the time as NetApp was really coming up, and NAS, I'll say, was really coming up as a big piece of technology. So SnapMirror was a big part of that success. And I remember it being one of the things that I first heard about that made me go, huh? And kind of look over at NetApp and what they were doing. So if you don't mind, like, give us a little bit of background on you. Like, why are you sitting here today?
Yeah, I mean, I've been into storage, working on storage products, as you mentioned, probably for the last 25 or so years, probably longer, 30 years, 40 years. I started out right out of college doing hardware testing. A lot of the very first servers that Compaq came out with, the big tall ones. System Pro and all of those things, the first versions of those, I did a lot of testing with those, a lot of storage when we were using parallel IDE drives for IDE arrays. I left Compaq and went to another big competitor of NetApp's. Starts with a D, but we won't go too detailed there. But I did a lot of work.
Four-letter word, folks.
It's a bad four-letter word, exactly. And I did a lot of storage testing there. I started out with some of the old Windows NAS servers, Windows Storage Server. Worked with Microsoft Cluster Server with some old Data General Clarion products back in the day. Fiber channel arbitrated loop, baby. That was fun stuff. And worked on several of the platforms that vendor was selling over my entire 2000s, 2010s, and then I did some work at an SSD vendor. So I learned a lot about how SSDs work and a lot of the advantages and disadvantages and how to overcome some of those disadvantages.
So you're a seasoned storage guy, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, storage has been where I've been at, and for almost my entire career. So came to NetApp. Really didn't know a lot about the technology at NetApp, and had to learn it very quickly. And was given right off the bat the responsibilities for managing our data protection services. That are disaster recovery, and we'll get into a little bit of that here in a few minutes. Is what's data protection and what's disaster recovery, what's business continuance and things like that as well. So
let's start there. That's a really good point to bring up. So before we talk about any specific like technologies, like let's give the lay of the land of like, where do you draw the lines between each of those three that you just rattled off? Is there a defined place where, I mean, obviously they all blur together at certain points, but where do you sort of differentiate when you're determining whether something is data protection, disaster recovery, or business continuity?
Yeah, so data protection is the overall idea of we've got to make sure our data is available and accessible at any point in time, right? And so, and how do we recover from a disaster or a data, whether it be a physical drive? You know, to be honest with you, RAID technology is probably the most core and basic data protection service, right, that we provide. Yeah. We do that in hardware very, very quickly and very low level, right? And we use that in ONTAP arrays with RAID groups and so forth. But when you move it up a layer into the operating system and ONTAP itself, and most vendors do this as well, right, is we think of data protection as a spectrum, right? It can be anywhere from and it really revolves around what's the media that I want to use. That media type will dictate some limitations on how much data I can protect and how often I can protect it. So think about tape drives, right? I'm not going to run tape drives and do a backup every 5 minutes. The technology doesn't allow it, right? But when we get to disk media, we do have that capability, right? The disks are a heck of a lot faster, and so when we move into that disk-based layer, we have a lot of options. And what we call our recovery point objective, really, how much data do we want to protect? How much am I willing to lose in the event of a catastrophic event? Yeah. And that's kind of where we and what we want to do with the data, right? And how quickly do we want to recover?
I used to describe it to, when I would have to pitch it to boards, I would describe it as if a meteor landed and crushed the building, how much data would you be willing to lose?
Right.
And they would say none. I'm like, okay, cool. So that's going to have this dollar amount attached to it. And they go,
exactly.
Oh, and they'd freak out. And they'd be like, well, maybe like an hour. I'd be like, okay, well, that's going to have this dollar amount attached to it, right?
And that's exactly
how these things shake out, right?
And that's exactly. And at NetApp, we kind of break it down into what we call synchronous, or that real-time protection that you just talked about, the zero. I don't want to lose a byte of data. And to that, okay, maybe I can live with 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour, 6 hours of loss of data. And that's what we would call asynchronous data protection. And that asynchronous protection really scales out to any RPO, right? I can use it. Yeah. I can now use that for disaster recovery, very short periods of a small amount of data loss, and having an ability to bring that data back up somewhere else. Like you said, the meteor hits, you can't bring up another server you can't bring up another storage device in the data center. It's gone. right?
Yeah.
But I may have a data center somewhere else, right? And so SnapMirror is our engine to do that. We'll talk about that. But also, I might want to do archival. I may want to, because of regulatory restrictions, right? I may need to keep 7 years worth of data, of my customers' data. Where do I put that? Well, I'm not going to put it on my production system where I need performance. I want to put it into a secondary system where I can have a lot of capacity, but performance is not necessarily, high performance IO is probably not required as a strict requirement. So we can even do that to the cloud. So a lot of customers are actually moving that, doing their archiving, not to an on-premises storage device, but to the cloud itself, and in the form of S3 buckets or object stores, right?
Now, we've even seen some of the more traditional like tape archival vendors like an Iron Mountain or somebody like that start to spin up and offer in the last, 10 years or so, SnapMirror destinations, right? To be able to archive a lot of that stuff. So,
exactly.
There's many more than them. I'm just using them as an example.
Yes, and we support, right, and we have relationships and products in association with all of the big three cloud vendors out there. So NetApp is everywhere, and ONTAP is everywhere, and SnapMirror pretty much is everywhere. And so it's a broad spectrum of technologies, and really what do I want to do with that data, right? Do I want to recover? Do I want to control recovery, or do I want to have an automated recovery system? So that's where we break in the line of disaster recovery, which is manually controlled, versus business continuity. In other words, when something fails, I need that critically to come back up as quickly as possible. And even if I can't get to the system, I need something to do to bring that up, and we can do that as well. We have several products, a couple of products that allow us to do that as well, all using the same technologies for data protection underneath, which is how do we protect the volumes that our data is stored on.
Yeah. So if we wanted to illustrate this, I want to pull this slide up here that you've got demonstrated. I mean, I think it's a really good example of how you can kind of piece this together. And if you start at the very bottom, you've got backup, DR, and BC all sort of laid out there.
Right.
And I think it's important to set this sort of foundation before we start talking about the individual pieces of technology, because there's not really a wrong combination of these things to use. It's going to be subjective to each and every business and each and every end user as to how you put these Tetris pieces together based on your own RTOs and RPOs that you've set as a company, as a practice, whatever it may be. So if we start aligning what we just talked about, what the differences were in the thought processes, what are the technologies and how do they align to each of those things?
Yeah. So and the core the core thing that I want, other than, and we'll talk about Metro Cluster a little bit when we won't go into a lot of detail there, but it's a very similar type of product. But really, the point I really want to make clear to everybody is, regardless of the solution and the requirements, RPO, RTO requirements, we all start inside ONTAP with SnapMirror. SnapMirror is your data protection solution for ONTAP. And so all that changes is you, as the customer or the user, telling us how they want to protect their data. Do they need 0 RPO? Then we would go to something like SnapMirror Synchronous or SnapMirror Active Sync. And the difference between those two being, one is a disaster recovery solution, which means that it's not automated recovery. It's something that we can manage directly and control. And then Active Sync. And Active Sync actually has the ability to automatically restart on the disaster recovery site. In fact, just recently, we enabled SnapMirror Active Sync to actually service the same data on both endpoints. So we can have nodes at each site actually accessing and working with the same data. And we're making sure that we're cross-replicating the changes so that they are in sync, right, at all times. So that's a really brand new feature that we just added, I think, in 9.15.1. Yeah. So so it has a much more a much bigger capability, and that requires synchronous replication, which is synchronous Active Sync and then Metro Cluster. Really, you mentioned it. You want that, you're going to pay for it. Mostly not in terms of our hardware and the NetApp hardware, but the networking required to actually
and the data center footprint in multiple
and the data
locations.
center footprint, right? Yeah. Exactly. And in terms of, if I'm going to be making sure that data, when I write data to a volume at my production site, it's also written in real time, 0 RPO, to the disaster recovery that could be 100 miles away. I have to have a very high performance network to do that. Very low latency network, more latency than throughput almost. So that technology is very specialized. Yeah.
Yeah. I tend to see MetroCluster mostly used anywhere there's a sort of campus situation where there's multiple buildings, multiple structures. You see it's popular in universities. It's popular with the government, things like that. Very, very large institutions that have multiple data centers, multiple offices and stuff like that. Like, the MetroCluster, to me, the difference between DR and BC is the users don't notice the interruption.
Right.
That's really the service continues to be served regardless of the location that it has failed over to or replicated from or any of that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Disaster recovery, you're going to have a downtime window of some sort to be able to recover from.
Right. And you would then, right. And so that's a big difference between disaster recovery is you have to probably will have to restart your application services, the clients that are accessing that data. Whereas business continuity, there might be a slight pause, but the applications are, for the most part, and the operating systems on those client hosts are unaware of the movement of the redirection of the source of that data.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit of history before we get into the current state of things. So almost 20 years ago now, that's scary and hard to say. There was a time when old Nick was an admin, ran a large data center for a healthcare company in the late 2000s. And I used SnapMirror, SnapVault, SnapDrive, SnapManager, all of these things. All of those different Snap words had a particular job. And I think what the work that we've done is really sort of consolidating a lot of that into a few key products and services, some built into ONTAP, some external. But can you give me sort of a current rundown of what the data protection landscape at NetApp looks like right now, given all of the things that I just sort of rattled off, that some of them don't exist anymore or have been rolled into something else?
Absolutely. Yeah. So obviously, almost all of our data protection solutions start at the snapshot. So there's your first snap word, right? The snapshot is really the powerful, the localized data protection. So I can take a point in time camera snapshot almost, right, of the data. And then I will have that data at that point in time available to me until I delete that snapshot, right?
Yep.
Now, SnapMirror has Snap in it as well. SnapMirror was designed and brought on to use those snapshots. That snapshotting capability, we leverage that. So what happens with SnapMirror is we take a snapshot of the active file system on the volume, and then we can let the active file system continue to operate and make changes, and we're not worried about that, right? We can then take that snapshot, replicate it to the DR side, and store and create and update the volume image there. And SnapMirror itself was for the active file system. It was a technology that allowed us to make the data in the active file system in production available at the DR site and store it at the DR site. What's really cool is snapshots are immutable. They can't be changed. They can be deleted, but they can't. Once the data is in quote unquote in the snapshot, it can't be changed. When we change data on the active file system, we're actually changing something else. We're not changing the blocks that the snapshot sees.
Yeah.
And that's cool because on the DR side, we can that volume is actually available as a read-only volume.
Yep.
So I can do other things with it, right? And so that's one use case for SnapMirror, right? Is being able to take a production volume on a production array with production hosts, create a replica of that on an offsite somewhere, and do really cool things, data warehousing and analytics and all of the things that you want to do, where I don't need to change the data. I just need to see it and consume it. So that's a really good use case, right?
We see it a lot for unit testing, for development, for batch
Absolutely.
processing and things like that. And typically you can see it on the destination, the end of the SnapMirror relationship can be a lower end system. It doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest, baddest production box that you have. So what ends up happening as people get through several generations of NetApp as customers is they have this sort of cascade effect that when they upgrade and refresh their production systems, well, that box is still good. Like the one that they're replacing is probably within 5 years old and is probably still a really good box. So that then cascades down to be their secondary system, if you will, in an offsite location. Sometimes even tertiary systems are there.
That's right.
So there's this sort of natural waterfall that happens with storage systems from NetApp because the beauty is it's all ONTAP. It doesn't matter what the model number on the front of it is. It's all ONTAP.
Yeah. And so, as I said, SnapMirror is really that snapshot of the active file system. Now, you mentioned SnapVault. We don't hear a lot about SnapVault in recent years. A lot of the old timers, the graybeards you talked about, still use the term.
I was a big fan of SnapVault back in the day.
So we've got this concept of, okay, I can take my active file system, I can take a snapshot of it, replicate that snapshot over here. But what if I have regulatory requirements that require me to keep a history of my data changes over time? So I may have to keep a year or 2 years worth of snapshots available that data because it got deleted in the active file system or changed, but I need that history. Well, that's where SnapVault came in. And SnapVault used a different engine, a different type of replication that allowed us to not only mirror the exact image of the active file system and the snapshots that it has on the production environment, but to actually archive and keep multiple snapshots and additional snapshots. So what we call an asymmetric relationship between the source and the destination. The production, the source, is still the active file system, and whatever real-time snapshots are there, we would protect. We can protect using SnapMirror. But if I just want to take a snapshot and then take that and archive that snapshot somewhere, then on another array somewhere, I might have 5 snapshots that I keep locally on my production environment, but I can have 100 of those for that same volume in my SnapVault, right? And so in the old days, it was really the term, we used different naming conventions, different branding, because they really were different technologies.
Yeah, and it was really, when you think about it, so SnapMirror was always about the replication. One-to-one, if it changes on the source, it changes on the destination.
Right.
SnapVault was your more traditional backup catalog of sorts, for lack of a better word, where you could keep 30, 60, 90 days of backups above and beyond the mirror relationship. So what ended up happening, or what some best practices you would design, would be to mirror from primary to secondary and then vault from secondary to tertiary, and you get the best of both worlds. And you could even take it one step further. I'm going to throw another snap word in here just so people understand how it all ties in. You mentioned regulatory requirements and whatnot. I was in public healthcare. We were one of those companies that had to keep 15 years worth of PII databases encrypted and have them around, right? We had our original database from 1995 in 2008, for example, and we could pull it up and mount it to an old Oracle instance. Like, we were that company. The way we did that was we mirrored, we vaulted, and then when we did another mirror that went into a snap lock volume. And that kept that around even further and made it fully immutable. And snap lock is the one that I'll let you you probably do a better job of describing it than I do, but so that's how we built things as long ago as 2008, 2009.
Yes, absolutely. And so in the history timeline, right, we had these two technologies, SnapMirror, SnapVault, two different engines. What we really figured out about probably 10 or 15 years ago was we can use that vaulting engine to do mirroring as well. So we really consolidated those engines into one. And it's still called SnapMirror today. But SnapVault hasn't gone away. It's just a different mode for SnapMirror.
How
right?
so?
Even in the old days, SnapVault was still created you created a SnapVault relationship using the SnapMirror command.
Yeah.
But it was really a different engine. Now that we have a single engine, and matter of fact, that old SnapMirror engine you can't even use in today. That's not even supported in today's ONTAP version. We've deprecated that version completely, and we rely on the SnapVault engine, what we call XDP internally, is the engine to do all of that. And then you mentioned SnapLock. So now the next layer of that is, how do I ensure that even my vaulted snapshots don't get deleted? Right. That's the SnapLock, and that's a special type of volume that we can create, and we can vault into. So once that snapshot is vaulted into a SnapLock volume, it is locked.
Yep. For
however long you tell me it needs to be locked. And that volume, when you create it, you say, anything in this volume, I want to be protected for 10 years, 100 years, right? Be careful, because in some cases, we can't even delete that data. Right. So that's how secure it is. If you use SnapMirror compliance, which is the strongest encryption that we have and the strongest control we have, even NetApp can't just delete that data. You literally have to destroy the physical media to get rid of it.
Wow.
So be careful with your SnapLock retention cycles. But yeah, so that's kind of the history that we have. And today we have SnapMirror using that single engine for asynchronous replication. Then we use it for vaulting, for mirroring of the active file system. We use it for archiving, and we use it for archiving into SnapLock volumes as well.
Okay, so finish the thought you were on a minute ago, so if somebody still wants to take advantage of SnapVault using the SnapMirror stuff that you were discussing, like how do we still do SnapVault today?
You do it exactly the same way you did it 15, 20 years ago. You do a SnapMirror for us CLI weenies. We use SnapMirror with a policy of type vault.
There you go.
And that is SnapVault in the old parlance, right? That in the old naming scheme, that is SnapVault. We're just using one engine instead of two. Gotcha. If I wanted to just mirror the active file system, I would do SnapMirror with a policy of mirror all snapshots or asynchronous. There's several policies depending on how many snapshots and whether you want to automatically do dailies and weeklies and monthlies. There are some policies that have some rules that allow us that are already pre-made for you, or you can create a custom policy of your own. Yeah. And then if you want to do synchronous, it's just SnapMirror with a policy of synchronous or strict synchronous.
Yeah, it's just another flag, another parameter that
a flag. It's just a
put
parameter.
on this exact same command, right?
Exactly.
So for those of you that have ONTAP systems available and haven't really dived deep into this stuff, pull up your command line. If you have a test system, fine, and just type SnapMirror and hit enter, and look at all of the options and parameters that you have available to you. All of the different flags that you can turn on, all of the different things you can change, or you can head over to the docs website and look through all of the command sets. It is one of the more vast commands with more options out there than that. It's so configurable and customizable, all of the different things that you can do with SnapMirror. Tony, let me jump in. There's a good question here. I want to clear up something real quick. Ashok asked, SnapVault is the latest in terms of immutable snapshots, worm to keep the data as per regulatory compliance. I think this is where we run into trouble a little bit, Tony, is all of our different snap words.
Right.
And I think what Ashok here is referring to is SnapLock. Or maybe some of the CyberVault stuff that we've announced recently this year.
So there's a difference between immutable and not able to delete the file, right? Or the snapshot, right? So immutable means it's read-only. So I can't change the data in it. When I go to worm or SnapLock, I can't even delete the snapshot itself, right? So I can't even destroy the data.
There's a situation, unless this is probably changed, but I remember the differentiation being I can't manipulate or delete individual pieces of data within the volume, but I can delete the whole volume if I'm an admin. But it was an all or none sort of thing, and we only did that once to clean out some stuff after legal holds and stuff. Like you deal with malpractice suits and stuff in public healthcare a lot, and it's a lot of legal holds constantly. So you have to put data into these snap-locked volumes and give them access to the data that's inside of it so that they can review it for discovery and all of that kind of stuff. That's just one of many, many, many use cases where you find this. But Ashok, I want to make sure that SnapVault is not the worm compliance stuff. That's SnapLock. There's also the CyberVault solution that we introduced this year that includes some of the pieces of the things that we're talking about today around SnapMirror, SnapLock, etc. So I hope that clears things up a little bit for you. Tony?
Yeah, and it's really weird because we have SnapMirror, which is really about replication. Yep. And we have snapshots, which are volume, is a function of something you can do at a volume level that's local. And you have SnapLock, that's also a volume parameter that says when you create the volume, you can define it as a SnapLock volume with a retention that says anything that goes into this volume by default, set it here, or I can do it on a per folder or per file basis. So I can lock specific some content only in the volume, but not necessarily. But there may be other data in that SnapLock volume that is changeable, right? Because I didn't lock it at the time I created it, right? So when I can create a lock at the volume level, I can create a lock at the folder level, and I can create a lock at a file level. So,
as a general rule, as a best practice, do you advise doing that? Do you advise? I'm always snap-locked volumes. If I put anything in it, I know it's a snap-locked volume. I wouldn't start mixing and matching like that if I were you.
Yeah, I tend to always err on the side of safety and lock everything if I'm going to lock something, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't want to, if you want to always have the ability to delete it through admin elevated, you can use what's called SnapMirror or SnapLock Enterprise, which allows an administrator to actually change that. Now, some regulatory requirements obviously don't allow you to use that capability, the financials, the healthcare, and those types of environments where you literally have to keep that data and it cannot be deleted. End of story, right? That's SnapLock compliance, which is a different mode. And when you create the volume, you define whether it's a compliance lock or an enterprise lock.
Awesome. Is it still a situation where, so does SnapLock Enterprise allow you to go in and manipulate data that's inside of it? If you don't set a default retention on the volume. So right. So I can write the data and then I can set a retention on a specific folder, for example. So I can say anything written into if I save a file in folder X and I have a retention on folder X, then anything that goes in there will be locked automatically. Or I can set the retention requirement at the volume level. And therefore anything written into the volume or what we call a default retention. That will be as soon as something's written in there, it's written once. That's that worm capability. Write once, read many. Right? Yeah. It is locked and by default. So there are retentions and then there's default retention parameters that you can use. I think that's something. Maybe we need to do a whole episode on SnapLock because it's worth it's worth going over all of these kinds of details because it matters. Like decisions you make on initial setup of these kinds of relationship matters. It might not in the first couple of months as you're just getting it all set up and rolling out, but a year and a half down the road when you get an attack or a rogue admin or somebody goes in, a rogue end user starts deleting a bunch of data, like it's going to matter. And whether you're dealing with compliance, regulatory compliance, whether you're dealing with just general data protection kind of stuff, like this stuff matters, and it's so important to get right at the beginning. Because with the worm stuff, like once you hit that flag or check that box or however you're going to set it, like that's it. It's you're not going to be able to get into it. Like you said, NetApp can't even delete it.
In a SnapLock compliance, that's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. So Thomas, I see your question over there. I want to hang on to that one for just a second. I want to make sure that we're not getting too advanced here and too into the weeds of some of this stuff like we already have. But what's the best way to get started with this from a practical standpoint as far as like, okay, I'm a new user. I want to implement SnapMirror, but I don't know how to design how this gets laid out. Do I just do it on the same HA pair between volumes on different nodes? Like, give me some of the basic 101 kind of best practices if you can. I'm on just getting started with SnapMirror.
Yeah, and absolutely. So the only thing that SnapMirror requires is a source object, data object, which we can talk about the scale, the kind of the granularity of what we can protect. We can talk about that. But all I need is a source object, a data store, like a volume, a flex volume, a flex group, a consistency group, or something like that, right? Or a LUN, right? Even. And then I need an destination. Now, those endpoints, it's ONTAP. It doesn't matter whether it's in the same cluster or in the same HA pair. Typically, you're not going to want to, you may not do that. And those are just, it's there, you can do it. What you really want to look at is having two, what I would call failure domains. If you're staying within the cluster, you're kind of within a failure domain, right? And so my production failure domain, I tend to think of as at least a cluster, and my destination or my DR domain where I want to recover to is another cluster somewhere. Now that could be in the same data center, could be across the street, could be across town, could be across the country, could be in a cloud. So that destination could be anywhere. As long as it's running ONTAP, we can SnapMirror to it.
Can I jump in on you real quick here for 1 second? So this goes back to something that I don't think enough companies and enough admins do. And they don't make the 3-inch ring binder Nick gets hit by a bus edition. Like what happens? And they don't do the entire scenario from a network interface card failure, hard drive failure kind of scenario to statewide, nationwide, absolute fallout. And there's steps everywhere in between it. The stuff that Tony's referring to is like one of those steps in the middle. But you're going to have steps for disk failures. You're going to have steps for network card failures. You're going to have steps for power failures of the site. You're going to have steps for a switch blowing out. You're going to have all kinds of steps in here. But that is absolutely fundamentally one of the things that every single person that's administering any kind of data footprint or just infrastructure footprint should have on their shelf in their back. You can have a digital one nowadays because we all have phones in our pockets. But I look at this as there needs to be a run book somewhere. SnapMirror is not the first one, and it's not the last one. It's just one of the things, one of the tools in that tool bag that you're going to use in that grand scheme of the DR sort of run book for your company and for your outline. And I just see it all the time where it's just like, yeah, we just trust what we've got. And I'm like,
testing failover. Yeah, testing the replication plan
aside, it's important to have that stuff before we even get to SnapMirror and ONTAP and storage systems.
Yeah, absolutely. At day one, you have to make sure that there's what we call no single point of failure. And that goes down to the disk. That's why we have RAID groups. It goes down to the volume. That's why we have, or the controller that the volume is attached to. That's why we have HA pairs. It's to the network. That's why we have multiple ports in each controller so that we can connect to different sub networks, so that we always have a path. We need multiple switches to ensure multiple paths through our network. What's nice about this is before we even get to SnapMirror, my volume is protected. It's protected by having an HA pair, so that if that one controller goes down, the other controller has direct access to the volume. It just takes over. And what happens if the entire HA pair fails? Well, if I have multiple HA pairs in my cluster, the other HA pair takes over the volume. So we in the cluster we provide as much redundancy as you want, right? And we haven't even gotten to the site failure. Now, the site failure is really where SnapMirror comes in. And now we want to take that data and provide a solution, a disaster recovery solution that protects us from an entire cluster failure. So we've got the HA pair, we've got protecting controllers, we've got multiple HA pairs protecting the HA pair, and or the cluster, we're protecting the HA pair. Now we want to protect from the cluster going away. And that means I can't access that data at all. And that's the point where SnapMirror comes in.
Yeah. It's layers of redundancy. And the ironic part of all of this is, like, as infrastructure admins, we've been doing this stuff for 20 something years, but somehow it's never taken that seriously, I should say, when it comes to storage.
Correct.
And I feel like NetApp is one of the few companies out there that has really taken this to heart in layers and layers and layers of redundancy, from all the way from the RAID situation and network connectivity and power, right? The actual physical layer one kind of stuff, all the way up to how we manage how blocks are written to disks, right, and how that can be sort of replicated, and how snapshots take advantage of some of that technology. Like, there's so many things in there that it's just layers of redundancy. There's another question in here from Kevin real quick I want to address real quick. It says, I'd be interested in some best practice defaults for initial SnapVault setup. It's easy to read the docs, but they don't convey experience. It's a good question, Kevin. And, all I can do is give you my experience. It took me a year probably to, like, really dial it in, but that was like 2008. So things have gotten a lot better. But just in general, my golden rule was always, we would do 23 hourlies, 6 dailies, 4 weeklies, 12 monthlies. And that was sort of the policy that I ended up. That was just a general sort of thing. Obviously, you tweak those based on what the application is protecting and stuff. But we would have a rolling hourly snapshot, and that policy was applied to every single volume that was on the system as a default. If it needed to be modified or even more intense, more protective than an hour, then that was where we had a couple of special. Exchange is a good example. We had more aggressive protection around Exchange. I think we had something like 5 minutes. We were taking snaps every 5 minutes of Exchange in the pre-Office 365 days of Exchange 2007. But that was using Snap Manager, Snap Drive, SnapMirror, and SnapVault before we were replicating it off to another site as well. So that was really intense kind of thing. But just in general, 23 hourly, 6 dailies, 4 weeklies, 12 monthlies, as a simple policy that you can implement.
And there's actually, and there's some predefined policies that ONTAP has that map to some of those common use cases where I do the hourlies, dailies, and weeklies. Yeah. And there's one for mirror all snapshots. And so your even the ones that you may have. So for example, you mentioned Snap Center, which is not an ONTAP tool. It's actually something that's running on your client system. That
PowerShell based.
That coordinates with the application itself. So if I have an Oracle database, I can coordinate with Oracle and say, I need to take a snapshot. Will you do what you do to prepare for that? And then let me know, and I'll go take my snapshot, and then I'll tell you to continue on. That's what Snap Center does.
It's what we used to depend on the Snap Manager tools to do, and Snap Center is sort of a consolidation of all of those with plugins for each application. Yeah.
Correct. And so those snapshots that you create, if I mirror all snapshots, those all get replicated as well. Not just the ones that SnapMirror is doing based on the policy that we've defined, but anything that's what we would call manually created or application created through an API or whatever, those get replicated. Those can get replicated too, depending on the policy. So every customer's environment, every user's environment is unique, and you have different business requirements, right? So SnapVault is really focused on retention policies, not compliant retention policies like SnapLock, but that's another layer on top of it. So so if you feel if your business requires that I want to keep a 12-month history of my snapshots, then I can do that. And so, for example, I can schedule so that my day, once I take that monthly snapshot, I can delete the dailies, that took place, or the weeklies that took place before, because I don't need to consume that space. Right. So you can manage that through policies. Absolutely.
Right, and so the policy basically it's a rolling set. So
that's correct.
Instead of keeping a day, so you would only keep one daily, and that daily would happen at midnight, but the 23 hours that preceded it were all hourlies, and I know it's a lot. It's
a lot.
If you're brand new to ONTAP, it is a lot to get your head around. But man, I tell you, once you do and you see the light and that click happens, and you just sort of start putting it all together, it's like Neo being able to see the Matrix. Like I'm serious. It's doing there's a reason you only do 23 hourlies, is because that 24th hourly is actually your daily. That's the way that you sort of have to matrix it all together. I see further comments going on. We absolutely are going to have a Snap Center dedicated episode in the near future. Stay tuned. Teaser, wink, wink. We're going to get into all of that kind of application-based kind of specifics and stuff like that. Great question, Kevin. It makes me want to go make a video on how to do some of this stuff. Tony, maybe that's something we can collaborate on, like
Absolutely.
how to design some SnapVault policies with SnapMirror.
Yeah, and I actually have some stuff already prepared. I'll have to go find it.
Oh, really?
We can definitely do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, we can talk
we'll
about rule. We can talk about policy rules and building custom policies and all of that.
Hell yeah, I definitely want to do that then, because that's my roots of NetApp lay. That's why I'm so vividly remember that, because I remember that gotcha moment where I went, oh, I get it. Everybody goes through that. Everybody has that moment with ONTAP, with any of the Snap stuff, Flex and Snap words. There's one other thing I wanted to bring up real quick. We've talked a lot about mirroring things to secondary destinations. We've talked about vaulting things over there and things like that. All of it's based on the snapshot that you mentioned earlier, under the covers, and how the way that we write and map blocks down to the storage, right? Mm-hmm. There's two things. One, is it still the case that SnapMirror, this is their dirty little secret, SnapMirror is a pull operation. It's not necessarily a push operation from the primary. Is that still the case?
That's correct. So the SnapMirror relationship and the scheduling is controlled from the destination.
Bingo. And what is the significance of that in your mind, as far as
I think
why
there's
do
some
things that way?
Yeah, so there's potentially some security related stuff there in terms of what ports you can allow open and closed and those types of things. But also, if there's a failure, you push. I think it allows the I hadn't really thought about it. I do know there's some security related issues. I know it's very important for secure environments.
Well, I always understood it as well to take the overhead of the operation off of the primary.
Off of the production. That's sure, right? And that's definitely another one.
Because you're constantly scanning deltas in blocks since the last snapshot of a volume. So that is happening. The scan that I understand is happening on the main system. On the secondary system, and it's looking at the delta changes and grabbing those delta changes and bringing them over.
Actually, it does.
That's what I understood.
What we call
the performance reading.
Differentiation still has to happen, because the destination doesn't see the changes, right, until we get the snapshot. So,
right, but it's just looking at the waffle mapping of the volume on the primary system and going, hey, you got any changes? I'm about to replicate. And Waffle goes, yeah, here's some things. And okay, I'll grab these blocks then, and it yanks them over. So it's not really... It's basically just, it's a pull operation, because it's doing all the requesting and pulling itself of the changes, so that doesn't have to happen on your primary system. I want to go ask engineering now if that's the reason, because that's my own feeling. But I'm with you. I honestly don't know. I know exactly who to go ask.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
I'm going to go find out now. It's so funny. I've been managing these systems for 20 years almost, and I look at it and go, huh.
Yeah.
Nobody ever thought to ask the question why we do it that way, right?
Yeah.
It was always an assumption. Let's see. We got some more questions coming in. Do we have any access to lab environment from NetApp to practice configuring SnapMirror setups? I'm assuming Vault policy setups and stuff too.
So if you're a NetApp customer and you have a support login, we have our lab on demand. So labondemand.netapp.com. There's a whole series of labs there that you can create, hang around for a few days, and play around with all of this. Absolutely. Yep. There are SnapMirror, SnapLock. There's several labs there specifically to allow you to play without touching your production environment. Right.
Yep.
Resources on site. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's all virtual environments that stand up. I believe you lease it for 5 days. You can extend it for longer if you want to, but yeah, they're sort of portable, disposable environments that get stood up for you to do these kind of labs, and you're not going to break anything. So it's great to play with it. But you do have to be a NetApp customer, partner, or employee, unfortunately. So
there's a couple of labs that I think are...
oh, really?
yeah, that are accessible without, but I don't know which ones. But for the most part, yeah, you would have a support contract, then you can get access to these lab on demand. So you have a login to the support site, for example.
Right. Let's get to some more questions here. Let's see, Tom said having the configuration for keeping the SnapVault versions on the destination feels more secure. Yeah, that's kind of the point. That's one of it. I think there's a performance element to it as well. But I'll find out. You know what? I'll find out and let you guys know what I find out in Discord or on an upcoming episode. That's a good one. Let's see. Kevin said lab on demands are great, but many don't replicate HA clusters, just single nodes, so you have to translate that. Yeah. And that's really about like how many HA clusters are we going to give people on every single virtual lab that we stand up. Like there's a give and take there. You sort of have to use your imagination a little bit. It's all using our simulator, which you do, if you're a customer, you have access to as well. You can just download a VM and play with it in your own lab environment if you want to be able to do some of that stuff. So if you want to expand more into a sort of test bed sandbox environment on your own side using virtual machines, you can absolutely do that with the ONTAP simulator. But again, support site. Let's see. Lakshmi said, I'm not a customer. Shall I get around it to access labs? More on that sooner, Lakshmi. We're working on something for folks in that situation. I want to empower people that want to learn about NetApp and ONTAP to be able to do so at their own pace, whether or not they're a customer. And we have some initiatives that are it's just going to take some time to get it going, but stay tuned. There's something potentially in the works that we may see next year. So that's all I can promise for now. I'm going to pull your slides back up here, Tony. You had another diagram we wanted to go over as we get towards the end here. Where are you headed with this one?
So let's talk about those endpoints, right? What are the data objects that we can protect, right? So we can protect the flex volume. And a flex volume is really just, it's a NAS container or a file system container that traditionally volumes have been tied directly to the hardware, the disks themselves or the RAID groups that they are built on, and you can't move them around. So what NetApp did, especially, and imagine it's probably when we converted over to clustered ONTAP.
Yeah, it wasn't that way hadn't been that way for a long time. It was about 2012 when we did clustered ONTAP.
Yeah, and so we kind of disconnected that one-to-one relationship of volume to physical disks, or aggregates as we call them, and so that we can do the things that we do to protect this flex volume, right? This volume, the data, we can move it between HA pairs. We can, without anybody knowing about it. We can replicate it. We can do all sorts of things. We can grow it. We can shrink it. We can do a lot of things. So the flex and flex volume, that's exactly what that means. I like to think also of flex, the term flex with flex volumes is that a flex volume can have a lot of different protocols access it. We can have S3, we can have NFS, we can have SMB and CIFS. We can put a LUN on it and do iSCSI and Fiber Channel and VME to that LUN, right? The other thing is we can create what's called a flex group. What if we took a bunch of these flex volumes and combined them together into a logical container? We call it a flex group. And that allows us to distribute our load across multiple aggregates for that one volume. It allows us to create larger containers and larger file systems than a typical flex volume would allow. And it allows us to distribute the IO and the data storage itself across multiple aggregates and multiple nodes. So we can have more ports acting for us, more controllers acting for us, and more disks acting for us with a flex group. And that's really the only difference between those two.
Well, there's some history there as well. One of the reasons that obviously there's multiple use cases for flex groups. And yes, we're going to have a flex groups episode soon for those that are asking. I told you we're going to do a whole series the rest of this year and beyond on some fundamental stuff. There was limits on the size, the max capacity you could have on a flex vol, and I think the biggest I ever saw it get was about 100 terabytes. And as we got into the last 5 to 10 years and we started beginning to see petabyte scale, people wanted to put more than 100 terabytes in a single volume, and they were hitting those limits, especially when you're doing like backups and archives. Like you can easily stack up 100 terabytes of backups over time. And so we started to need these larger things. So we needed a container of containers. We needed a bigger bucket to put our other smaller buckets in. And that's really sort of the evolution of flex groups. Yes, it has all of these other big benefits, such as being able to load balance across systems, being able to geolocate across different types of things, bring data in from multiple locations, but still be part of the logical namespace. There's all kinds of use cases where you can implement that, but it was really driven by people wanted bigger volumes. People wanted bigger pools of places to put stuff.
Exactly. So we can protect flex volumes, flex groups. We can also protect the entire server, the NAS server, what we call an SVM, or a storage virtual machine, which may have 50 volumes in it, or 10 volumes, 10 flex volumes, and 10 flex groups, and replicate the entire SVM, all of those volumes, with one SnapMirror command. And that's really kind of the next slide is really, not only can we protect the objects within the storage virtual machine, but we can replicate and protect the storage virtual machine's identity, its IP addresses, its CIFS export or NAS NFS exports, its CIF share definitions, its access control list, everything that makes and allows us to create a NAS server in this SVM. We can replicate across to the DR site and activate it as an entire SVM. That is a massive change to just protecting a single volume. It allows us to protect the entire file system and all of the volumes that are attached to that file system.
I frequently get asked, or I did, at least I did in the past, not so much recently, but 10 years ago, people would be like, man, I miss 7 mode. Why are y'all doing this cluster mode stuff? This right here. We introduced a layer of abstraction in there that was basically still the ONTAP that you were used to working with. And it still did all the same things with all the same flex balls, but then you could just virtually pick that up and migrate it to another storage system. You were never going to do that with 7 mode.
We call this, this is ONTAP running in ONTAP.
Yes.
It's kind of the way I think about it, right? Is what's internal to the SVM, what that SVM is basically what you had before clustered data ONTAP back in the day. And yes, you can, and this is our core multi-tenant container. I can have all sorts of access controls, different networking, data lifts, different subnets. I can attack. So this is the kind of the multi-tenant object that allows you to host multiple users or multiple organizations within the same physical cluster.
We used to have configurations that we would do called secure multi-tenancy, where we would build these kinds of configs. You know, we used to use the comparison that Coke and Pepsi could live and exist on the same storage system with certain practices. A lot of that comes from this. And this is the baseline of, like, if you're used to working with VMware or any other hypervisor, like, you're going to be comfortable, because this is similar to how from a fundamental standpoint, like, if you take the VM and all of its disks and move it over, you're taking all of the configuration and all of that stuff over. Fundamentally, it's the same concept. It's not identical, but it's the same concept of how we can move that. And now I want you to picture this. We support up to 24 nodes in a cluster for NAS and 12 nodes in SAN, right? So you have 12 nodes or 6 pairs in a SAN environment that you can do this with. Think about the load balancing you can do. Think about the automation you can do, the leveraging all of the storage with flex groups, regardless of how many shelves are attached to each one of the arrays. You can mix and match all of that stuff. There are so many combinations that you can put together with things like this that it's seemingly limitless. So keep all of that in mind. It's important to keep all of that stuff in mind.
It's interesting, Nick. What's interesting here is that the SnapMirror technology, the engines that we use to replicate, we use in a lot of different other areas, right? So this, by the way, this replication and protection of an SVM, you will hear the term SVMDR. It is really just SnapMirror with a source and destination path of an SVM. But it's the same asynchronous SnapMirror that we do with a volume or a flex group. We're just doing it across the entire SVM. We use the term SVMDR for that. We have Another tool that we uses these same engines, these same replication engines that are used by SnapMirror, called SVM Migrate. How about the ability to do an on-demand movement of an SVM non-disruptively, so that you need to your point of earlier, maybe disaster avoidance, right?
Yeah.
We had several hurricanes here in the U.S., right? Maybe there was a data center in Atlanta or in Charlotte, North Carolina, that it was in the path of that hurricane. We could move all of their SVMs and all of their data and all the attached client movement, right? The attachments that the clients make non-disruptively, move it to a data center that's more further inland or outside of the cone of disaster, so that we can continue to operate even if that data center gets direct hit by that hurricane. So that's,
I think we could spend another hour talking about
you mentioned
design.
load balancing. Yeah.
Well, I think we could spend a whole other hour on SVM configuration and migrate, best practices and stuff like that. There is so much to unlock there just in what you were just describing. Like, I have so many questions that I would want to ask if I were a customer, such as, like, how do you move that much data that fast? Is it just moving over and moving live writes, new writes to the new system and backfilling over time? Like, there's so many different configuration options that you can do and so many different, but the beauty is, the thing to take away from this for me is that, yes, you can now vMotion, for lack of a better word, your ONTAP configuration. Like, I don't know of a better way to describe storage than that.
Yeah. And we're integrating this into, in terms of how to actually configure and set up SnapMirror and these data protection services. Obviously, we have the CLI that's available. We also have ONTAP System Manager, which is the web-based interface that we do that, so that we can, if you like to do the GUI stuff, you can do that. And we also have BlueXP, which is our external cloud-based control plane that actually allows us to manage our arrays and set up SnapMirror relationships, protect different types of environments. We have a thing called a special service called BlueXP Disaster Recovery, which is focused right now on protecting VMware environments that are hosting or using ONTAP for their storage. And so all of that is built into BlueXP. So there's a lot of, and by the way, the whole API. So we have a REST API that anybody can access to actually do this. We have the PowerShell tools. If you want to do it from a PowerShell scripting perspective, that leverages those same REST APIs. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you interact with ONTAP and how you configure, manage, and monitor your SnapMirror relationships. Yeah.
This is Tony. We're over time. We got to wrap up pretty quick. But is there anything else we want to get to here? Because I think there are so many options that we could go over with how we do this. As far as, like, I'm a big PowerShell guy. I'm old VB script guy. Like, that was the way I did things with all the Microsoft tools and stuff in the early 2000s. But I really got into PowerShell in a big way. Don't use it as much nowadays because Windows has gotten a little bit better. But at the same time, like, you still got things like Server Core out there. And yeah, we do keep the PowerShell toolkit up to date, guys. So I don't know if you know we have that. It's out there. So you can go to the support site and download the NetApp PowerShell toolkit. And it's kept up to date. It's updated at least once or twice a year. So keep that in mind if you're doing any sort of automation. Ansible, Terraform, all that stuff's available as well to build automation around these things. And those are further episodes of deep automation stuff we're going to get into in the future. We're starting at the basics. Tony, any final thoughts as far as like getting started with SnapMirror?
I think we've covered the basics. I think don't be afraid of trying this out. You can replicate to a destination. You don't like it, destroy it, right? You can just delete everything you messed up. You're not going to you're not going to impact the production environment. If you want to set up some stuff, it really is about just jumping into the deep end and experiencing yourself. Labs on Demand are there. Lab on Demand is there to do that if you want to do that first, and then promote and kind of graduate to trying it out with one or two of your volumes that may be less critical. play around with scheduling. The one thing we couldn't dig a lot into, I think, is this policy, this idea of a policy and how it controls SnapMirror. But that's definitely something we can discuss as well. Documentation's out there as well. There's a couple of videos and so forth. And if you have any questions, whether it's the community site, whether it's Discord, feel free to drop a question. We have our support team there. We have myself out there as well, that we can definitely help if you've got any outstanding questions as you investigate the capabilities. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Tony, this has been awesome. This is exactly what I wanted this episode to be. This was a great chat. There's so much more we could talk about. We're going to in the future, guys. Bear with us as we work through this series. But I see all of the requests in the chat. Yes, a lot of those are on the upcoming list. I just haven't made banners and put them up in Discord and put them up on YouTube yet. Stay tuned for that. Probably a lot of those are going to go up next week. But a lot of the things you guys are asking for, we're definitely going to be covering. Tony, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you helping me kick this off after Insight and get into the swing of things. Oh,
anytime. I appreciate it. And then if you let me know if you need any other sessions. We'll definitely help you out at wherever we can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tony.
All right. Thanks a lot.
All right, guys. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed that. Kicking things off with a little ONTAP 101 fundamentals around SnapMirror, SnapVault, but a whole bunch of snap words we talked about in this episode today, and we got a lot more to talk about. So I did see requests for Snap Center. It's on the list. I saw requests for SVM Migrate. It's on the list. There's literally a whole list. You can't see it because it's all blurred out, but all of those are upcoming ONTAP episodes right there, right? I promise you there's a huge list of stuff coming up. I'm taking this seriously because one of the things that I will always vividly remember of being a new admin to NetApp, I worked on old Fiber Channel application-based stuff, a lot of Oracle, a lot of Exchange, a lot of Active Directory. I didn't hear NetApp until a third-party channel partner brought it in for eval against things like EqualLogic and I think 3PAR at the time, 2006, something like that. And I fell in love with it. The minute I discovered SnapMirror, SnapVault, SnapDrive, Snap Managers, all of those things, they're literally the things that made me fall in love with ONTAP. It took me about a year to get it. It took me about a year to get my head around how all of the moving parts worked. But I promise you it's worth it. Once you get there, something unlocks. It's Neo seeing the Matrix, as I said earlier. But yes, we're going to be doing lots of stuff. All the Flex and Snap words coming soon. We're going to be going through all of that stuff. We could have dove into a whole Flex clone segue here today, just talking about this stuff. But that's for a future episode. My name is Nick Howell. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode. We'll be back next week. What are we doing next week? I don't even remember what's on the calendar, but we definitely have one scheduled for next week. Until next time, we'll see you guys in. Bye-bye.